I'm going to turn things over to our panel here, and I'm going to actually stop showing the screen here, and we're just going to make our panelists be the main focus point here. So give me just a moment. There we go. We're going to stop sharing, and we're going to start in on the questions. So give me just a moment. There we go. First question up. We have a customer who recently deposited funds into her checking account from an inheritance. Now she's been making frequent cash withdrawals, all under 10,000, but over the 2,500 amount that we monitor. 1 week she withdrew 4,000 in a day, then 3,000, and then 4,000 in a 3-day time period. The conversations with the tellers, with the customer and the tellers, indicate she's using the cash to make purchases to give to family members. They don't believe that this customer has a knowledge of the CTR filing requirements, but want to know, would this be structuring that would trigger a SAR filing?
Okay, so I'll go ahead and take this one. It doesn't sound like there's any intention here on the customer's part to avoid the BSA reporting requirements, and there needs to be intention for it to be SAR worthy, essentially. So in this situation, I don't think I'd be filing a SAR, but it sounds like you're doing an investigation already. So I would document that investigation and decision not to file and maintain that documentation.
All right, thank you, Michaela. Next question. We are a small bank with assets under 100 million, and they're in the state of Illinois. We have one customer who is an employee of a marijuana-related business and no other marijuana-related business accounts. So very low risk is what they believe it to be. The employee is even paid via ACH deposits. In their expanded questionnaire, which was apparently triggered because one customer or employee of an MRB, they want to know date last SAR was filed and what type of SAR you are filing. Limited, priority, termination. Isn't that confidential information?
All right, I'll take that one. And this was related to a review that they had. They have this customer. They've been flagged as higher risk. And so then they're asking, okay, when was your SAR filed? And they're asking, okay, well, should we be providing that? Well, first off, yeah, you should be filing the SAR. The guidance is a little fuzzy here. It talks in terms of marijuana related businesses, and there's a lot, you probably set your program up with that. But the requirement to file a SAR is if you detect transactions that come through your bank. So even though you have an employee here, those ACH transactions that are coming in, they are from a marijuana related business. So that would trigger the requirement under the rule. So if you're going through a review, they're going to want to know, okay, did you file this SAR? Are you keeping up with the requirements? So if you're a little fuzzy on that, I would check out the guidance that came out on marijuana related business, and it really breaks down limited, priority, or termination SARs for this specific type of transaction. And know if you're sharing it as part of an audit or a review, that wouldn't be confidential.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Next question. When a customer brings in cash that meets the CTR threshold for reporting, and part of the cash pays down their business loan, some pays down on their personal loans, and or sometimes it's deposited into their personal DDA. Would the conductor be 2A, a person conducting transaction on behalf, since part of the transaction involves either a personal loan or a personal deposit that the conductor is an owner of, and they are conducting on behalf of another, and on whose behalf, and it just says the other owner of the personal loan or DDA.
Okay, well, the good news on this one is you don't have to try and figure out which conductor reason you have to use, because in, I think it was October 2019, FinCEN decided to change the instructions on how you complete a CTR when you have a conductor doing multiple roles. So what they said is you do a part 1 on the same conductor for each capacity, each role that they are acting as. So you'd actually have 2 part 1s. You'd have a part 1 on the conductor, the transactor, acting on their own behalf for the deposits that they're making into their personal accounts. And then you'd have another part 1 on that same conductor, that same person, but they're acting on behalf of another for the deposit or the loan payment to the business entity. And then of course you'd have that a third part one on the business entity itself.
Great.
All right, thank you, Deb. Our next topic is cryptocurrency for question number 4. And it says, cryptocurrency, what should a community bank be doing with BSA AML on cryptocurrency, especially since this happens to be the state of Nebraska, adopted a bill that makes holding digital assets legal for Nebraska banks. The other problem with this is Coinbase is on the stock exchange. So how can transactions with or through Coinbase be worthy of a SAR if Coinbase is a publicly traded company?
All right, I'll take this. So to answer the first part, when it comes to what should community banks be doing, first and foremost, address it in your risk assessment. And so when I'm out with our clients, something that I talk about is in this case, if you're a Nebraska client and your bank's considering custody, you're going to want to address that in terms of product risk assessment, looking at, what does this entail? What do we need to be considering before we make this decision, etc. But more common than not, I would address it as almost an emerging risk. So similar to marijuana, hemp, those types of things, it's important that you demonstrate to your management teams, your boards, and your auditors and examiners that, hey, we're aware this risk is out here. Here's maybe how we're planning to handle it. Maybe it's you're not banking it. Maybe it's you're banking it in a limited capacity. Maybe you're defining the volume or the exposure you have to it, but address it in your risk assessment. The second part of that question, when we talk about Coinbase being publicly traded or not, I really think that's probably irrelevant. Coinbase happens to be an exchange. They happen to be US based. They happen to be recently publicly traded, but there's lots of other exchanges out there. I think the most important part of this is determining whether or not the activity is unusual or suspicious for your customer. And now that's going to take you right back into customer due diligence. So, is it unusual or suspicious? What did your CDD tell you about that customer? I kind of like to say wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Maybe you should be asking or consider asking if this is something that's coming up frequently in your bank. If they plan to engage in it, what was the volume they plan to engage in? Maybe in that case, it's completely normal, not suspicious. Now, in that case, I wouldn't file. Now, if it's something unusual or the volume seems suspicious, or I like to talk about the direction of it. So if it's lots coming in to the bank, does that make sense with what you know about the customer? Or if it's lots going out, maybe it's ACH is out to Coinbase, does that make sense for your customer? If it does, then I wouldn't file. If it doesn't, I would investigate and determine at that point whether or not a SAR would be appropriate.
All right, well, thank you, Michaela. Our next one is about beneficial ownership. So the question is a beneficial ownership form required on a safe deposit box?
I'll take that one. That one's short. Generally, yes, you do have to follow the beneficial owner rules for your safe deposit box. However, keep in mind, there is that exceptive relief that's out there. So remember, every time you have a account that's new or an account that it renews, like maybe you do a modification or a renewal, that normally triggers the beneficial owner rule, and you have to go through and follow your procedures there. But the safe deposit box, there's actually some accepted relief out there if you have an automatic renewal on your safe deposit boxes. So you wouldn't technically have to follow the rules there. But keep in mind, when you open that new account, you do still have to get that information. You have to get it the first time. So if you have it on file, then you don't have to chase them down, but you still do on that first one. So watch out for some confusion there.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Just a reminder, you can still submit questions using the Q&A button in the Zoom control panel. We have several pre-submitted. We've got several that have come in through the Q&A portal, but go ahead and type those in. Again, we're gonna get to as many as we can today. Our next question has to do with driver's license, and the question is pretty short and sweet. When can you keep a copy of the driver's license?
I'll take that one. So in general, if it's for your CIP or CDD purposes, it's okay to keep a copy of the driver's license. What's not okay is if you use that in any way in making a credit decision, the photo of someone in making a credit decision, that's when it's not appropriate. Prior to this, many of you know, I was a former OCC examiner, and I can tell you from experience, if we found a copy of a driver's license in a loan file, we would question it. However, if it was maintained with your CIP and CDD documentation, that's considered normal, and we probably wouldn't have asked another question.
All right, thank you, Michaela. Our next topic is going to be CTRs for this question. And it goes like this: how should a CTR be completed for an incorporated car dealership who has one account with our financial institution? There are 4 DBA locations, one of which has the same address as the home office. There were deposits made from 2 of the DBAs, one of which is also the home office. The question is, how many Part 1s are required based on the ruling? Are there 3 or 2?
Okay, I get the CTR questions. In this case, there would be 2 Part 1s. So backing up a little bit, when you have an entity that's incorporated and then is doing business as under different names, you would file a separate Part 1 on each different location from the home corporate office for the DBA where the transaction took place. So in general, you have one Part 1 on the home office, so you'll always have that one, and that will show the total amount of all the transactions that happened. Then in this case, there's 2 other DBAs, but one of them has the same address as the corporate office. So you don't do a separate Part 1 on that one. That is just pulled under the Part 1 for the home office. So you'd have the entity's name on Part 1. I think it's in item 4, and then item 8 is where you can put the alternate name of the DBA. So that's where the DBA with the same address as the home office goes. Then you'll have that separate Part 1 for the other DBA with the different location. And that would have the amounts of the transactions that took place just at that location.
All right, thank you, Deb. Our next question: when do you need to, or what is the best practice to send out BSA certifications to third parties you work with? For example, participations, purchase loans, banks and non-banks alike.
All right, I'll take this one. Sounds like the person who asked the question's on the right track. But I would think of these BSA certifications as kind of a tool to help you verify that the third parties you're working with are doing whatever they need to do from a BSA perspective. Now, so having a best practice, it kind of depends on what the relationship is. You laid out a number of relationships there, and it might be different for each. But the key here is you evaluate that relationship, determine who is supposed to be doing what and where the BSA risk might be, and then use that certification of a tool. Because no matter who is responsible for what, as a financial institution, you really need to be, making that determination that the things that are supposed to be done are getting done by somebody, and you want that documentation. And one tool to demonstrate that you thought this through and that you believe they are doing what they are, anticipated to do, is that certification. So I would say use that as a tool, but I wouldn't necessarily break it down as, we do it for these and not for these. I would do it based on that relationship and what the expectations are.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Next question. This is SAR related. When completing a SAR for suspected fraudulent ACH credits received with a payee name other than that of the account holder, should the payee of the ACH credit be listed as a suspect, or should the suspect be listed as unknown?
All right, so in this situation, it sounds to me like there's an investigation needed to really determine who the suspect is. So in this situation, I would encourage you to investigate. If you find that the suspect is the payee, absolutely, list it as suggested. If not, I would still include that though in the SAR narrative, because something like that is something that law enforcement would likely be interested in.
All right, thank you, Michaela. Next one has to do with BSA AML software. And the question is, how often do you see banks testing/validating their AML software programs?
And this is another one of those tricky questions, but there is guidance out there that says suggests you should be doing it annually, but then it goes on to say that you should be doing it more often if risk kind of dictates that. So I would say really it depends on what exactly your software is doing, how complicated it is, and and kind of work that into your actual frequency. There is guidance out there on how this should be done, but I wouldn't necessarily lock it into a time frame unless you've done that initial risk assessment, because really your frequency should be based on the risk of what types of products and services your bank has, and then also what exactly is your AML software doing and how complicated is it.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Next one has to do with W-8 BEN forms. Question is, can you please advise, when is a W-8 BEN form required? Is it true that if a non-resident alien has a social security number or an ITIN, that a W-8 BEN form is not needed?
Okay, the W-8 BEN form is required whenever a non-resident alien opens an interest-bearing account. However, most banks will always do a W-8 BEN on a non-resident alien when they open any type of account, even if it's not interest-bearing, because, for example, if they open an account that's not interest-bearing, the W-8 BEN's not required, so you don't get one. But then 6 weeks later, they come in and they open a savings account, which is interest-bearing. Now you need that W-8 BEN, but are you going to think about it because they're an existing customer, you've already done CIP, you're probably going to overlook that W-8 BEN. So most banks do it whenever a non-resident alien opens any type of account, whether it's interest-bearing or not. And a non-resident alien is an individual that is not a US citizen and does not meet the substantial presence test, which is there's a formula for calculating how many days that non-resident lived in the US over the past 3 years. And if they meet that test, they're formally not considered a non-resident. So then this wouldn't apply to them. It is not true for the second part of the question. If that non-resident alien has a tax ID number or an ITIN, you still have to do a W-8 BEN. So whenever you have a non-resident alien, regardless of if they have a tax ID number or not, you have to do a W-8 BEN on an interest-bearing account. What that's probably getting at is, these are IRS rules, so we're not experts in that area, but if you do have a tax identification number and you put that on the W-8 BEN certification form, that form then, with certain conditions, would never expire. Whereas if there's not a tax ID number on there for that non-resident alien, that form has to be renewed every 3 years. So that's where the tax ID number comes in.
All right, thank you, Deb. We're gonna go back to the land of SARs here. My question is about the content of the SAR narrative. Should we be including information in the narrative that is already in the report, such as the bank name, type of suspicious activity, or should the narrative be reserved for other associated details that are not already captured, background information, why the activity is deemed to be suspicious?
And I'll take this one. There was actually an additional part of this question that I think queued it up is they were told in a recent presentation that they should not be duplicating information in their SAR. Now, I think what's going on here is the presenter, there might have been a miscommunication. There was a recent FAQ that came out that just said you are not required to duplicate information in the narrative section of your SAR. So if you have information that you've already entered into the previous section, when you're typing up your narrative, you aren't required to repeat any of that. However, it doesn't say you should not or must not repeat information. I would say stick to your narratives, make them clear and easy to understand. If there's something that's pertinent or helpful to law enforcement, include that in the narrative section. The FAQ was simply saying that it's not required that you have it in both places. So that might be where the confusion was.
All right, thank you. Okay, thank you, Kevin. Next question is one that I know that our team gets a lot, especially our review team. And so it goes like this: what new BSA requirements can we expect once we reach $1 billion in assets?
Right, we get this a lot. I had to smile when it first came through because my answer, I'm going to tell you, normally we start really hearing this question at 500 million. So probably most popular formal triggers for asset size, there aren't any for your BSA program. However, as you grow and as you change and as you branch into new products and services and geographic locations and whatnot, your program needs to mature and expand along with that. Two of the areas that we hear most often that pressure comes, unwritten pressure comes either from examiners or auditors, whatever the case is first on automated monitoring. We'll start hearing that quite a bit as banks approach the $500 million mark. So if you don't have an automated, I think I said automated underwriting. I mean, automated monitoring if I did. Anyhow, automated BSA monitoring. If you don't have that, you're probably going to start hearing conversations or entertaining implementing something like that in your bank. When you grow that large, it's very difficult to really know all of your customers, and it's even more difficult to get away with saying that you know all of your customers to an examiner. The second area that I would say that we hear most often is kind of a harsher eye or look taken at your risk assessment. So is it comprehensive? Is it quantitative? Does it include all your products, services, locations, etc.? So those would be the two. Automated monitoring for BSA and risk assessment might be things that are unspoken that you're going to get some pressure to implement.
All right, thank you, Michaela. Our next question. I know we don't need to complete the risk rating on minors. The ones I do have a question on are estates and trusts. Are we required to complete due diligence risk ratings on these types of relationships? If so, would it be treated as personal or business, as we have two different forms?
Okay, I'll take this one. And first, I just want to clarify. They said that they don't need to complete a risk rating for minors, and I don't know if that's entirely accurate. The requirements of your customer due diligence program is that you have a customer risk profile for all of your customers. So that would include your minors, the states, the trusts. Keep in mind, this is know your customer. So the question is, you should have at least a basic understanding of the nature and purpose of the account, and so that you can look for suspicious transactions. So for all of these accounts, you want some method of determining what your risk rating is. Now, you may determine that once you have certain information, they're going to be lower risk, and that's just fine. So let's shift gears and talk about the second part there, where it talks about, okay, should we use, with estates and trusts, should we use personal or business for those two forms? And I would say you have the flexibility to do what you would like. My recommendation, though, would be to look at those accounts, those estate and trust accounts, and find out what are the money laundering, terrorist financing risks that are associated with those accounts. Whichever form asks the right questions, and you may find you might need another form or another set of questions because they're just different enough, and they have maybe different types of activity profiles where you'll want to collect different information. And that's why this customer due diligence program requirement is difficult, because as you kind of uncover things, you're going to find, you know what, maybe our standard form isn't enough. Maybe we need to ask additional information, or maybe for this particular customer, there's information that we need that we just don't have. So I'd like to say that your forms are perfect and you never have to touch them again, but that's not going to be how it works. You're going to be updating your forms and adding new questions and tweaking your enhanced due diligence process right along. So.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Our next topic is going to be a question about beneficial ownership. And the situation they give goes like this. An individual wants to open an account and identifies Joe Blow as one of the owners on the certification form. The individual who is opening the account indicates that Joe is out of the country and spends his summers overseas, preventing him to provide a copy of his driver's license establishing identification. Can we legally open the account and indicate in our policy that if we don't have all the proper forms of identification upon account opening?
Okay, well, my first thought on that is, why can't Joe Blow email a copy of his driver's license or fax it or send an image or mail it to the bank? So that was what popped into my head at first. And then I want to make sure when we're talking about identification, before you open an account, you have to get that identifying information on who the beneficial owner is. So you have to get the name, address, date of birth, and tax ID number. And then the driver's license is the verification part of it. You can do identity verification, so getting a copy of the driver's license to verify that identifying information that they gave you. That can be done within a reasonable time after account opening. Most banks don't, I want to say, don't do that because it's proven difficult to get that information once you've opened the account and have it obtained within a reasonable time. And then you have to have written procedures that say you will allow this, and what will a reasonable time be. Generally it's 2 weeks or up to 30 days, usually not any longer than 30 days. And then what are you going to do while you're waiting for that? Yes, you can restrict activity on the account, but if you never get that verification document within your reasonable time period, are you going to close the account? How are you going to handle that? That all has to be in your written procedures. So yes, you can do the verification after account opening, but you have to have procedures in place and you have to have it within a reasonable time.
All right, thank you, Deb. Our next question says, we are inundated with senior citizens getting scammed. Does every scam represent elder financial exploitation, elder abuse, or does every case of elder financial exploitation need to be reported regardless of the amount?
All right. Well, and this one, unfortunately, it is such a broad term. This elder financial exploitation. It's very broad, and it's basically anytime you use the money, property, or resources for your own personal gain, that falls under the umbrella of this elderly financial exploitation rule that's out there. So it's very broad. So chances are you are going to be seeing or suspecting a lot of this. Now, they didn't come through. There is guidance that's available on this. It didn't come out and change the rules, you know, where you have your required triggering amounts and then whether or not you've identified a suspect. But if you look at what it actually says, the guidance says generally it's required to file a SAR when you detect illegal activity through the bank. And then it goes on to say and encourage banks to file these SARs even if they're not otherwise required to. So I would say, you know, you still have the flexibility to make your own determination on when your SARs are required or not. There isn't a special extra requirement here, but keep in mind the guidance does say that they're kind of expecting that everybody's filing it when they encounter it, but there isn't a clear mandate out there with respect to this. But I can say the general trend is that they're encouraging banks to report this as much as possible and encouraging banks to work with law enforcement whenever they can or whenever it's appropriate. So.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Next is just a new account question as it relates to risk rating or risk assessments with the account. When doing a new account risk assessment and the account comes up to be a medium or moderate risk account or relationship, but has no or very limited cash transactions, do we still add them to review more often? Now, in the question, they went on to give some different areas like OFAC, ACH, county tax. Kevin, if you maybe want to address this one.
Yep. And so really what looks like is happening here is they have a system that kind of automatically risk rates their customers. And so when certain red flags are popped up, they go into either a higher or medium risk, category. But keep in mind, you have some flexibility to develop your program how you would like. These red flags do pop up. So I say, no, you can't just ignore them simply because they have limited cash transactions. But you can reassess their risk assessment based on information that you gather. So these account opening red flags may pop up. Like one of the examples they have is if the name doesn't match a name on the account. So there's a name mismatch. Well, that may pop it up to medium. But that doesn't necessarily mean you need to monitor the account more. Maybe it triggers you to go in and ask it for additional information. You resolve that disparity, and then you might knock it back down to a lower risk category. That I'm fine with that. Or you may go through and you find out, oh no, there's a lot of irregularities in the way this naming convention is working. It doesn't really make sense, and that may escalate the monitoring. The other example they had were on county tax accounts where there was cash going through. But it wasn't, wasn't necessarily something that was a higher risk. And I would say, again, your system on account opening may trigger it as high risk. And I would say that is your, that's kind of the impetus to go out and take a look at that account, do your risk-based assessment, and you may determine, okay, this is the appropriate level of monitoring. Just because your system's kicking it out doesn't necessarily mean that you're locked into that or that there's any kind of federal regulation that mandates it. You have flexibility to kind of tweak your system according to the risks with any individual risk profile. So, it sounded like this question was these are system generated red flags, and I would say, well, that it doesn't necessarily mean that it's mandated that you have a specific monitoring requirement. It's based on the risk and based on what your program is requiring.
All right. Well, thank you, Kevin. Next, we have a group of questions, and I'm going to do them one by one, but just to let you know that we've had several of the submitted questions on behalf of private ATMs as well as pre-submitted, and we're going to do a bunch of them right here. So the first one goes like this. Regarding privately owned ATMs, are they required to register the ATM with the state? We'll start with that one.
Okay, I'll take that. In general, no, most states don't have a registration or monitoring requirement. Some states do. It's really going to be a matter of state law in that case.
All right. The next two, I'm gonna give you both of them. And the first one is general in nature. The second one's a little more specific. So the general one says, just do you have any suggestions on how to monitor private ATMs? And then the specific question is, what is recommended for enhanced due diligence if they fill machines themselves and the deposits don't come from our bank? In other words, they're not loading the machine with money taken out from our bank.
Okay, gotcha. So in general, the FFIEC handbook has kind of step-by-step walks you through this, but in general, you're going to want to know your customer. And in the case of a privately owned ATM, the cash is going to be a driving thing that you want to understand. So where's that cash coming from? Is it reasonable for that customer? Does it make sense for that customer? And then when it comes to the due diligence side of it, I would encourage you to obtain the contract if you don't already have that. The contract, in my opinion and from my experience, has always revealed a lot that maybe the bank didn't otherwise know. So for example, look at the names on the contract. Do the names match up with your customer and how their accounts are set up? Look at the agreements with how the transactions will be handled or how the fees will be handled. That's going to be stuff that you can then compare back to the activity that you're seeing run through your institution. Is it consistent? Does it make sense? And if it doesn't, I would be investigating for a SAR.
All right, I'm going to keep you right there for just a moment. I think this last question you kind of answered here just with the answer you provided, but it goes like this. Currently, we ask for a copy of the leasing agreement, but what should I be looking for within that lease agreement? Is there anything to add?
Oh, off the top of my head, I don't know that if I have anything to add. Kevin, I know you look at the
I would say
fair amount.
Really a lot of it is just making sure that you understand what's going on. I think your previous answer when you said reading through the agreement, sometimes you learn things that maybe you didn't realize before, or maybe it triggers some additional red flags. Maybe there's some parties involved that you're not really clear on why, what exactly they're doing. And part of it, some of your investigation is just how do they respond to your questions? If you call up and say, hey, where is the cash coming from that's going into your ATM, and they hang up on you really quick, that might be a red flag, So it's, I would say do your due diligence and at least be able to document that you understand what's going on and it makes sense to you, and then monitor it appropriately to make sure that nothing, changes significantly.
All right. Thank you, Kevin and Michaela, both. Next question is more of a scenario, kind of a story that was provided, and they kind of want just some guidance moving forward. So goes like this. It's a little lengthy, so bear with me. At the monthly board meeting, a loan officer reports that he is missing several years of tax returns on a customer. They have been contacted several times and the customer responds that they haven't filed their taxes. That's not good. A SAR was filed for possible tax evasion. When it comes time to review the SAR for continuous filing, the loan officer has now waived the exception for tax returns on the customer. So we really have no information as to whether they have or have not filed tax returns. Does this release you from filing a continuous SAR? Otherwise, if that was still a loan exception, how long would you file continuous SARs? I think the rest of my team here is probably cringing, but I'm going to let you have at it.
Well, yeah, my first question is, why are your loan estimates letting this kind of thing, or your loan officer letting this kind of thing slide? You've got a pretty significant exception here. You have some, just from a standard banking practice, you've got some problems that you may have kicked the can down the road a little bit, but eventually it's going to come back to haunt you. So with respect to the continuing activity question, though, at this point, you don't really know. There isn't any activity on behalf of the customer that's, would trigger that as far as transaction activity. But my gut feeling is, now you kind of have what looks a little bit like collusion between your loan officer and their customer. And to me, that might even be a bigger issue for a SAR. So I guess Michaela, Deb, what do you think on that continuing activity side?
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you. It doesn't smell very good. I wouldn't want to be part of it. I'd just get it reported, get it out of my hands.
So whether it's an additional SAR with this new information or continuing, and just adding these additional facts, I would do at least one more.
Yeah, I remember, so our fearless leader, Dave, I remember saying, he said, and shares with the trainings, loan officers, don't ever forget what side of the desk you're on. Waiving that exception, which I don't get in the first place, I assume there's a time and a place for it, isn't going to make this go away in this situation.
Right.
All right, our next question starts with, I don't have a particular question, but looking for more guidance regarding marijuana and hemp. Aren't we all, right? We don't necessarily want to bank them, but I just saw something that warned against de-risking, looking for guidance on policies and risk assessments. Kevin, this one's right up your alley, bud.
Yeah, since I'm the marijuana guy now. Yeah, actually, you are absolutely right. De-risking has been a problem for a lot of years, and it's not just with the marijuana and hemp industry. It's just been in general with higher risk customers. As soon as FinCEN puts out guidance, banks tend to pull back or maybe close down some accounts, and or they just try to get out of certain industries. And so there has been a pretty loud and clear message from FinCEN saying, please stop doing this because it leads to problems down the road. Banks, instead of, and part of it was in the exam manual. It used to say that it was the obligation of the bank to limit and control BSA risk. Well, the easiest way to limit and control your BSA risk is just to not bank anybody. If they're high risk, kick them out the door. But they actually changed that. In the last 12, 18 months, we've had a number of BSA exam manual updates, and they actually took out that limit and control language and replaced it with mitigate and manage your BSA AML risk. So what they're cautiously encouraging you, don't just limit it or get out of it, manage it appropriately, approach it with your risk assessment, set up whatever you need to be comfortable with some of these higher risk accounts. Don't just run from them. That being said, there's nothing that says you have to bank any of these customers. I would say, really for these high risk areas, you need to sit down and evaluate the risk, discuss it with management, find out what their risk appetite is. Marijuana and hemp is very complicated. There are so many levels. One of our earlier questions got into marijuana related businesses, and I can tell you what, you can tweak that and dissect that category. It's very broad, and maybe there are some marijuana related businesses that you will be banking, and maybe some of them you won't. The key is to divide that up and to break it down into manageable concepts. Same with hemp. There may be, your bank may entertain some hemp relationships. You just need to use your risk assessment to kind of break down what risk you're going to accept and which things you're going to avoid. Once you have, okay, we will do X, but we won't do Y, the question is, how do you know that you're not doing Y? And so you really need to build a program, particularly if you're in a state where, particularly recreational marijuana, if you have recreational marijuana in your state, you're going to need some kind of program. Even if you're not going to bank any MRBs, you're going to want to have a program where you can, show examiners this is why we're comfortable we don't have any of those transactions. Because remember, the requirement is to file SARs, not just if you have a marijuana related business entity at your bank. It's whether or not you detect transactions, and that is odds are you're going to have them coming through your bank, and you're going to have to be on top of it. So a very long-winded answer to a question that wasn't really a question. So.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. I think there's a lot of questions about MRB that's still out there that don't have great hard concrete.
And on that, we have a webinar where it's an hour long of just how to break down marijuana related businesses, hemp related businesses, CBD oil, and just how to kind of dissect that into manageable chunks. So, not something we're going to, knock out of the park today.
Something I noticed, Kevin, when you were talking is we were talking about the BSA AML exam manual updates. And I've caught myself saying BSA AML risk, and I just caught you saying BSA AML risk. That's something we've talked about risk assessment throughout this program. Language that was replaced and used very frequently in the new revisions is MLTF, for money laundering, terrorist financing risk. And so just kind of a note there, you'll catch us probably using the inappropriate terminology or old terminology now, but just an area that you can always update to. And I mean, it just demonstrates that you're on top of your program. There's changes and you've adjusted for them.
Yeah, that's great. A great point. Yeah.
Great point. All right, our next question. So the bank collects tax payments on behalf of, let's say, like the county, I think is the scenario. One of the bank's customers brings in the taxes to be paid to the county. It's an amount, it's a $16,000 some odd dollars and cents amount. It's for several rental properties. The customer did not deposit the money into her account and had the exact amount in cash. What are my part ones relative to the CTR? What box is marked in number 25?
All right. Well, and I'll start on this, and I may have Michaela and Deb jump in to back me up, because this is a really unusual circumstance. From the question, it sounds like the bank is actually acting on behalf of the county and collecting tax payments. So the question is, what's the arrangement there? Is there some kind of lockbox that's supposed to be set up, or is this an actual deposit? We're a little gray on what exactly is going on there. So it could be a CTR isn't even necessary, but it kind of depends on what's going on. But let's assume that it is, that this is the bank taking a deposit. First off, you would need a part one for the person who's conducting the transaction. So that would be, the first step, and then you would probably need a part one for this county account, assuming that you haven't exempted them, depending on how that's all set up. Let's see, then, so like that treasurer account or whatever it's set up. I think they ask also about number 25 or item 25, which is where you have the laundry lists of, the types, whether it's a deposit or whether it's, a currency exchange, that section of the CTR. Since I'm not really sure, I doubt that it's supposed to be set up as a deposit, but I don't know what the relationship is. My guess would be that this is probably likely one of those circumstances where you would drop it down into 25C, or there's an other category, and then you actually specify what that is. So I would say this would be a real estate tax payment. But again, if you're, since I don't have all the details here, I hate to say it, I might even reach out to FinCEN and ask them what they want you to do with this. Any other ideas there, Michaela, Deb?
I was gonna say, when we were talking about this as a group too, we kind of questioned whether or not it was truly going into a deposit account or if it was even a GL account at the bank, and that would make a difference as well.
Exactly. Mhm.
My take on it is there's over 10,000 cash coming in the bank and you have a customer bringing it in and you need transparency on that customer. So there will be a CTR, in my opinion, and they're making their real estate tax payment. So it's part one is on their own behalf. And that 25, the cash in, like Kevin said, would be other, and you'd put real estate tax payment.
All right, thank you guys. Let's go to the next question here. This has to do with remote deposit capture and the BSA AML MLTF take on that sort of transaction or transactions. Our bank offers remote deposit capture to businesses. Should the bank be reviewing these transactions for suspicious activity? If so, what are some red flags or things to pay attention to?
I can take that one. Yes, you need to be monitoring that activity, remote deposit activity, for suspicious or fraudulent transactions. And there is actually some good guidance on that with the FFIEC. And if you just Google FFIEC risk management on remote deposit capture, you'll get that guidance. And on page 8, it outlines what type of monitoring you should be doing. So for example, your systems should be able to identify things like duplicate entries and altered or corrected entries, rejected items. And then some other things you want to monitor would be like volume reports. So have you set deposit thresholds for them, and are they going over that deposit threshold? And what is causing that activity? Is the trend of their volume of deposits increasing, and how does that compare to their peers? So just a few things to consider.
All right, thank you, Deb. Our next one is back to the land of SARS. It says, define appropriate law enforcement agencies as it relates to disclosure of a SAR under a grand jury subpoena.
That's a good question. It really kind of depends on what your jurisdiction is, what the grand jury subpoena is asking about. I mean, it could be, you know, now first off, you have this grand jury subpoena, and oftentimes, you know, those are confidential. You're not supposed to be going out and, you know, advertising that you're receiving it. So it kind of depends on the context. If, you know, it already looks like there is a law enforcement agency that's involved, that may be who you reach out to. But it might be worth just reaching out to whoever you received it from and getting clarity on who exactly or what law enforcement agencies are involved, and have, you know, what level of understanding of the potential suspicious activity that was triggering this event.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Our next one is a CTR question. We had an account with 2 owners with a DBA, and then another account with the same owners with a different DBA. We needed to do a CTR for both DBAs, so we did a person conducting on own behalf for both DBAs, and then on behalf of the other owner for each DBA. Is that correct? Only one owner was present. Now, before we answer that question, remember this is being recorded and there was a lot of DBA going on there. You may have to go back and listen to that one again.
Okay, that sounds like it's correct if I have it all straight in my head. There's 2 accounts, 2 separate DBAs, but the same owners for each one. So these accounts have joint owners. So when you make a deposit to an account with a joint owner, when you do a CTR, the other owner of the account is benefiting. So you do a part 1 on each owner. And in this case, you have 2 different DBAs. So yes, you're going to have, sounds like 4 part 1s, because you've got 2 DBAs and 2 people benefiting from those funds. So the one conducting is on their own behalf, plus the other owner, joint owner of the account, is person on whose behalf it's being conducted.
Thank you, Deb. I'm glad you kept that all straight. All right, let's go to the land of cryptocurrency next. It says cryptocurrency is a new subject of conversation in the BSA environment. Is the use of cryptocurrency suspicious activity SAR worthy? How should a bank monitor cryptocurrency for suspicious activity?
All right, land of cryptocurrency tends to be my land, so I'll take this one. We kind of touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but just use of the currency in and of itself, no, not suspicious. Um, Now, if your customer, if it's unusual for your customer, or they don't have a reason to be using it, or the volumes don't make sense, all those things we talked about, you're going to want to investigate it for a potential suspicious activity report. In terms of monitoring cryptocurrency activity for suspicious activity, most often you're going to see this come through an ACH format. So for our clients that maybe don't have automated monitoring, one of the ways I recommend for them to monitor this is getting that ACH report, usually a monthly type search, and doing just some keyword searches. So you can search different exchange names, you can search coin, you can search just Google some common cryptocurrency terminology and search those things, and just kind of get a feel for what your exposure is. Is there any? If there's not, I wouldn't worry too much about it. And if there is, I might look at it a little further, consider including it in my risk assessment. For those banks with automated monitoring systems, you can tailor alerts around these exact same things. So that's how I would do it in that situation.
All
Yeah,
right.
I would agree with that. And the other thing is, there's a lot of people who think, okay, this is automatically suspicious. I can tell you, I'm seeing a lot of cryptocurrency activity just in the last 12 months, and it's not, not all cryptocurrency is bad. You just really need to understand what it is when you detect it in an account. Like Michaela said, make sure that you understand that that's normal. If you start seeing either transaction behavior or amounts that just don't make sense with your understanding of the account involved, then maybe you might be escalating it up. But yeah, I wouldn't file a SAR every time you ran into some cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I kind of liken it to cash. Not all cash is bad either. Just like same with cryptocurrency. It's just another transmission of value.
Mhm.
All right. Next question says that we do not offer business accounts. We have a customer member that owns multiple gas stations. They make frequent large cash deposits that do not always require a CTR to be filed. Does this seem like normal activity for a gas station owner to be dealing with so much cash?
Yeah, well, that's a good one. And without specific amounts, it's kind of hard to tell you whether it's normal or not. I can tell you that gas stations deal with cash all the time, and they do have it going in and out. So it's not unusual that they're dealing in a lot of cash. However, without being able to compare it to peers or understanding, where they might be situated geographically, what kind of volumes that they typically deal with, it's hard to say yes or no whether it's unusual. But my recommendation would be, trying to find out. I mean, if you have any other accounts, that'd be great. You could make a comparison, or just simply picking up the phone and discussing it with your customer and finding out, okay, looks like you've got some cash going through here. We're just trying to get an understanding of where it's coming from and the ins and outs of your business. And some people don't like answering those questions, but that's the only real way you're going to get to the bottom of it.
Well, and in this situation too, given this bank doesn't offer business accounts, I think there is an element of unusualness that this would be going into a personal account. And so, yeah, I would definitely be asking more questions around the activity.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right. Next question is about beneficial ownership. It says, if a business submits a beneficial ownership form that identifies that is partially owned by another business entity that we do not have as a customer, would we need to require the business identified as the partial owner to give us an additional beneficial ownership form identifying the business owners on that business?
You wouldn't necessarily need another beneficial owner form. You just need the single form for your one entity customer that's opening the account. But your customer due diligence, you do have to break it down. So it depends. You still have to identify who are the actual individuals, or the heartbeats is how we explain it, the heartbeats behind the company. And based on that ownership criteria, if you have 50% of a customer or of this entity that's owned by another legal entity, you're going to want to drill down and find out, okay, who owns that other 50% share. Really just to narrow it down, maybe you need another beneficial owner to be identified on your form. or maybe you don't. But from a customer due diligence perspective, it's good to have that information rather than to just assume that it's, you know, that 50% is kind of in a black hole. You really want to narrow that down. But that being said, you don't necessarily need an extra beneficial owner form just for that other company. That's not a trigger. Now, how you go about resolving your customer due diligence conundrum, that's really kind of on you, how you want to document that. I'm just saying you don't necessarily have to have that form, you know, to do it. You just need to make sure that you've figured out who your beneficial owners are.
All right, we'll get on to the next one here. We got time for maybe a couple more here. Is it up to the bank to determine the residency status? Our customer service people are asking the BSA department if the customer is a non-resident alien.
I mean, I think we're gonna kind of learn that throughout your customer due diligence process.
Can you repeat the question again?
Sure. Is it up to the bank to determine the residency status? So whether or not somebody's a non-resident alien?
I would say, yeah, as part of your customer due diligence, because there may be other questions or information that you need to ask about that customer. And you might have to get a W-8 Ben on them.
Right. I'm trying to figure out, I don't know a scenario where I would say, yeah, no, it's fine. You don't have to worry about it. I think it's definitely something you're going to want to follow up on.
All right. I got time for one more quick one here. We talked about tax evasion earlier. And so this question goes kind of along this lines. The loan officer noted that there was potential tax evasion going on, and doesn't say whether or not they filed a SAR, but they do ask about, would this increase the risk category of that customer relationship? And then number two, would we need to revisit the continuing SAR filing?
Well, I would say yes, definitely it does impact your customer risk assessment. Keep in mind, that's not a static determination. Anytime you've assigned you know, a risk level to a customer, any changes you run into could potentially impact that. Maybe it's transaction activity, maybe it's a change in ownership, maybe it's just they did something that was a little suspicious at the teller window. I mean, so you know, noticing something like tax evasion, I would say that is suspicious activity, and it not only should go into a suspicious activity SAR investigation, but it also may impact the enhanced due diligence that you're doing on that particular customer. Since you've noted that that activity or that suspicious activity, then you're probably going to want to monitor it going forward. And you know, you may have continuing activity that you're filing a SAR on, but I would say, yeah, you probably have a higher risk customer if you're identifying that kind of activity.
Yeah, particularly if there's a low risk customer and you even investigate for potential suspicious activity, usually that bumps them up to a moderate or high risk just for a period of time.
All right. Well, thank you, team. Believe it or not, that hour just flew by, and we want to respect the time that all of you that took the time out of your schedules to stop by and take in some money laundering terrorist financing question and answer during our program today. We want to be respectful of that. But before you go, we want to announce the next part of our forum series that we do every year. All of them are very highly attended. We get lots of great feedback on them, and the next one is no different. We try to make sure that you don't miss out on anything. There's a lot that goes on in the background when it comes to compliance in general. So every year, the fourth quarter, we do a forum that's called A Look Back and What Lies Ahead. And so you can go out and register for that immediately. You can go to our website. It's free, just like today's program. And we're going to cover what happened, make sure you didn't miss something. We're going to look off into the future and see what's coming down the pike. I anticipate quite a few changes here down the road. We'll talk about those and what we know about things at that time. So let me do this on behalf of our team. Kevin, Michaela, Deb, thank you for all of your questions. There was no way to get to all of them, but we tried to get to as many as we could during the time frame. If you're looking to go back and listen to something again, we will make that recording available to you in a very quick turnaround time. Or watch for that email. We'll notify you by that method. Then you can go to our website and download the recording for today's program. So there's a survey that likely popped up in another browser window. We'd love to have you just take a minute. That guarantee that's all it's going to take you to give us just a little bit of feedback on the program today. There's 5 short questions. With that, again, thank you on behalf of our team for stopping by today. We're going to now let you get back to what it is that you all do so well, and that's serving your customers. Thanks again.